Once again, welcome to St. Mark. It's great to have you here, whether you're at our Green Bay campus, our De Pere campus, or many of you on our online campus. It is wonderful to have you here. I'd encourage you to open the Bible to Acts chapter 2 as we continue our 5-part series entitled Church World, taking a look and seeing what Jesus wants the church in his name to be. It's great to have you here. Apparently, they had a disagreement about how to set up the stage, Lauren said to Corinne. You see, Carrie, she wanted to make sure that the musicians were on the left-hand side of the stage, but Gabby wanted them to be more toward the center so they could lead, and they simply didn't agree, Lauren said. Well, your group that came from Green Bay and now have been in the last year or so in Tennessee have been having church in one of your members' homes, Jim's home. But now, because of God's grace, you've grown, and you need to move, and now you're planning on going ahead and renting the local high school and its auditorium and its stage for your first worship service outside at another location. And you see, Carrie, who is one of the Tennesseans who have now joined your church, she went to that high school and had some very strong opinions about where exactly the musicians should be. Well, a little later, what happens is Gabby comes over to Lauren and some of the other women and says, you know, my conversation with Carrie went better than I thought it would. Yeah, we disagreed, but I think it ended on some pretty good terms. In fact, Carrie even walked up to me at the very end and looked me right in the eye and said, honey, bless your heart. And then she walked away. Well, Corinne, another Tennessean who had just recently joined your church, suddenly looks at Abby and says, oh no, Abby, listen, you need to go and talk to Carrie as soon as possible. That phrase doesn't mean what you think it means. You're not from around here. You don't know what it means. We don't need that kind of attitude in our church. You need to talk to her immediately. This is not good. Sometimes it's just a matter of a different perspective. For those of us listening who grew up in church world, those kind of discussions, disagreements, maybe even conversations are kind of commonplace. But for those, the majority, who've grown up outside a church world, well, they don't think those kind of discussions even have a place in a typical congregation in their community. For decades now, Christian churches have conducted surveys to determine why people don't attend. And those surveys give you answers that you would feel would be the typical answers like, I don't have time, church isn't important to me, I think churches talk too much about money, I didn't grow up in a church family, I think the services and sermons are boring. But if you've done enough of those surveys and you've read enough of them, there's another answer to the questions that come for the reason they don't come to church. And here's what it sounds like. Well, the church is just full of a bunch of problems. Many, many people, unfortunately, outside the church see it as really a community of people who are inflexible, hypocritical, judgmental, and just plain mean. Splits and divisions, fights and arguments are just commonplace, they believe. Years ago, when we conducted a survey, one man answered, listen, I got enough problems in my life. Why would I join a church and have more? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could offer those in our community and ultimately the world a gathering, an assembly, what we call the church today, where not only Christians are very comfortable, but unchurched people love to attend? Well, the scriptures teach us that's the kind of church Jesus wants us always to be, from the very beginning in the book of Acts chapter 2. In our series so far, we're about right in the middle, we're touching on the 5 keys of being the kind of church Jesus wants us to be. We've learned, for example, he wants us to be a learning church. He wants us to be a worshiping church. He wants us to be a loving church. He wants us to be a real life church. And he wants us to be a seeking church. So today, let's talk about what does it mean to be a loving church in Jesus' eyes. Take a look at Acts chapter 2, verse 42. They devoted themselves to the fellowship. To apply this, we need to take a look at the word fellowship. It's a word that will often pop up in your daily reading or your devotion in the New Testament. It comes from the Greek word koinonia, which carries the idea of people going through life, doing life together in love and unity. It's a heartfelt awareness. It's a relational unity. And notice we're told at the beginning, they were devoted to that. They were devoted to that kind of fellowship, that koinonia. And that tells us they knew it wasn't something that just happened to them. It was something that they had to make happen. They had to do their part. They had to be in the game. They had to be willing to sacrifice and do whatever they needed to do to make sure their fellowship was just that, a koinonia. But there was even more to that fellowship. Notice what this text says. They devoted themselves to the fellowship. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. The love that permeated that koinonia, that fellowship, wasn't just relational. It was hands-on. It was very tactical in that sense. They did something. Maybe they helped someone. For example, if there was a poor person, they met that need. If someone was being taken advantage of, they stood up for that person. If there was a single mom who had need, if there was a disabled child who needed some assistance, if there was a family that had some tragedy, the early Christians would gather together, sacrifice, and meet those needs. That's what they would do. If you're a historian and you know about early history and early biblical history, then you know that the Christian church was so well known for doing this that they not only did it for the people in their koinonia, their gathering, their assembly, their church, but they even did it for the poorest of the poor in their neighborhoods and city. That so impacted people that historians, both Roman and Greek and Christian historians, wrote about this, the fact that the Christians and their love had such an influence on the Roman Empire that in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century, it helped the Roman Empire really get rid of slavery, infanticide, and oppression of women. And it was that kind of love that was the catalyst for Christians back then creating what we have today known as hospitals, orphanages, and schools. One of the ways that you and I can express this kind of love in a loving church is to go ahead and actively share common grace. Now, the word grace, its definition is undeserved love from God for sinners like me and you guys. It's something that's from God, no strings attached. He freely gives it. It's His gift to us. We can't earn it. We can't pay for it. It flows from God's unconditional love shown us in His Son on the cross. And that's not just a throwaway line. When you see Jesus on the cross, the Christian message is He died for all of our sins. And that helps me sleep better at night. Because sometimes I wake up and I think about all the foolish things and sinful things I've done in my life or said in my life. Haven't always done what is right. And sometimes that haunts me. And then I remember what Jesus did on the cross for me. That He doesn't see my sins. He doesn't see my past. He's redeemed my past. He's covered my sins with the forgiveness He won for me on the cross. The only person throwing my past in my face to keep me up at night is Satan. And I can just tell Satan that doesn't work because Jesus sees me as His own. Perfect in His sight because of what He's done. It's that love Jesus has for me and you that motivates us to want to love others in the koinonia, the fellowship with common grace. That means, for example, you don't get easily offended by other people in your community. So often people get offended at almost everything today. That means you listen more than you speak. It means you give people the benefit of the doubt. It means you try to put their words and their actions in the best possible view. See, in a church, in a koinonia, when you're working with one another and extending common grace to people, it's really a verb. It's something you're always striving to do for the sake of the other person. A second way that you can share this kind of love in a loving church in a very tangible way is when you do have conflicts, when you do have disagreements, when people do wrong one another. And that happens in church world because all of you people are sinful. And so am I. And so it happens. Well, at that time, in a loving church, what you want to do is you want to have some conflict resolution. But oftentimes that doesn't happen in church world. Well, let me tell you what happens. Number of things. Some of you, when you have conflict with someone, what you tend to do is you take the conflict you have with a person and you stuff it. You bury it. And then you cop the attitude. Your motto in life is problem? What problem? I don't have any problems with anybody. And you do nothing with that. And that anger starts to burn and it metastasizes. And then what happens is it gets ugly and dark and you get a lot of animosity. It's like a splinter in your finger that you don't take care of. It festers, and that's not good for you or anybody that does life with you in a koinonia, in the church. Others of you, when you get conflict, you know what you do? You will go ahead and you'll give people the cold shoulder. You'll just cut them off out of your life. You let animosity win. Others of you, watched it. What you do is you flee. Oh, you just go to another church. You go to another school. You just go to another group. You go to another small group. You go to another church. You go to another town. You just run. Others of you, when you have conflict with someone in the church, what you have a tendency to do is become a hand grenade. Oh, any slight look that you take the wrong way, anybody who disagrees with your opinion, anybody who doesn't always see things your way, pulls the pin, and you just blow up all over them. None of those are of God. Every one of those is a sinful, damning way to handle conflict, because Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, such hatred and animosity in Jesus' eyes is murder. And I got to tell you, some of you know what that feels like, because you maybe grew up in church world, or you were in the church a long time and then left because someone blew up all over you. Someone cut you out of their life because they disagreed with you. And that hurts. And that's why people get church hurt. And maybe some of you listening right now, you're back for the first time because someone didn't handle conflict with you in a God-pleasing way. I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. That's not a loving way to handle conflict in the koinonia. So, John, what does love look like? Well, when you have a relational breakdown in the church, you try to handle it as Jesus followers. What you do immediately is you go to that person and you try to help as much as you can. Right first to that person, but that's generally what we don't do. We first blow them up on social media. But here's what Jesus tells you to do, Matthew 5. If you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Did you get the picture? If you're a partner in a community of faith and you got a relational breakdown with someone, you need to try to solve that as Jesus followers. Immediately. Don't put it off. That may mean you sit down at a table and you say to the person, hey, I sense some tension between you and me. And I just want you to be honest. Is there something I did to harm you or really upset you? Because I'd like to apologize for that and ask for your forgiveness. Or is there something that we just need to work out so that we're not poisoning our relationship and our relationship with God and relationship with others in this church? That's a loving way to handle conflict. But John, does that mean that when I'm in the church, I have to do this any and every time? I got to walk on eggshells anytime there's a little dust up? No. When someone doesn't agree with your opinion or your side of something? No. What the text is clearly talking about is when you've had words, or when they've had words with you, or you've done something that is not God-pleasing, or they have done it, and there's a relational break, and there's some anger residing in your heart, and they have some animosity towards you in their spirit, it's then that Jesus says you immediately drop everything you're doing, try to go to that person privately and discreetly, and talk things out. That's why Jesus, in our second reading, gave us these words in Matthew 18. If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault, just between the two of you. That's why if you've been around St. Mark for any amount of time and you're out in the atrium and you're kind of venting to some of your friends between services about how someone has wronged you or offended you, it's likely they're going to look you in the eye and say to you, hold on. Have you already talked to the person one-on-one? Because that's what Jesus wants you to do. Not talk about that person. That's what the devil wants you to do. Jesus wants you to talk to that person. First step, you talk to that person privately. Second step, I don't need to hear about it. A third way that we can show this kind of love as we're a loving church in a very tangible way is that we serve people in need. It says all the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. The third way to become someone who loves is to try to meet people's needs when the need is present. Maybe it's coming alongside of them and supporting them. Maybe it's monetary. Maybe it's your time. Maybe something you can do for them. About 3 months ago, it was brought to my attention that a woman in our congregation was diagnosed with cancer, and no one wants to ever hear that diagnosis, ever. But immediately, her friends here, her partners, gathered around her and told her right from the beginning, listen, you're not going through this difficult trial alone. We're going to be here for you. We're going to pray for you. We're going to go to appointments with you. We're going to carpool your kids if that needs to be done. We're going to bring meals to your family. We're going to do everything we can to support you during a very difficult time. Do you know when I heard about this? After all of that had been done. That's what loving people and meeting their need looks like in the koinonia. That's serving people in their need. That's what love looks like if you're trying to be a loving church. That's one of the reasons why St. Mark, people, partners, every year will go ahead and board a plane and go down to Mexico or to Austin, Texas, the missions that we, our church, support individually, to help other people know about the gospel. That's why we have people, partners like you, who regularly drop off supplies and diapers at the Bay Area Life Center. That's why we have a food pantry stocked with food for people who are less fortunate. That's why we offer a Christian counseling center. That's why we have people, wonderful people, ladies who every week go ahead and visit people who are homebound and shut in and offer them God's word and sacrament. That's why we have an annual clothing giveaway for people so that they can have something better to wear. The night before Jesus died on the cross, he gave a new command to his disciples then and to you and me now. It's this: a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another. Jesus wanted a loving church to be one of the keys to what he calls his church. And if you know anything about history, that's what happened. In history, with the teaching of Jesus in people's ears, the church expanded rapidly. And in the blink of history, it was so prominent and so powerful and so effective and efficient that it moved in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th centuries, the mighty Roman Empire, to go from really kind of a pagan empire to one at least more favorable to Christianity. And their historians would write about this all the time. Tertullian, I believe a church father, quotes what the people used to say about how the love Christians had for their own and for their neighbor just impacted the Roman Empire. Here's the phrase: See how these Christians love one another. The call on our life is to make sure our neighbors see that love again. That's what makes St. Mark a little different. That's the vision we're running after. Just so you know, by the way, I don't want you to leave today having an unanswered question about what exactly does the phrase, bless your heart, actually mean when they say it down south. When they say it down south, most often it is not someone trying to bless you. It is a phrase used down south to talk about your lack of intelligence or to speak ill will of you. To make this very clear to my Wisconsinites who are listening, let me give you a very good example. It's a beautiful day in July, 82 degrees, sunny, beautiful summer day. And you decide to take your family up to Door County for the day. And you're driving on Highway 4257, right? And someone is riding your bumper. They're riding your bumper. They can't pass you, but they're riding your bumper. And finally, they pass you in a very reckless fashion. And as they pass you, you notice, oh, they have an Illinois license plate. And the next words that may come out of your mouth, or the next thoughts you may have, are likely very similar to what bless your heart means when they say it down south. Now, we certainly don't need that kind of attitude on the roadway. We don't need road rage. And we certainly don't want that kind of attitude at St. Mark. So St. Mark, continue to strive to be a loving church.